everybody in the room pretty much knows of him or had the pleasure of meeting him. He is the professor of surgery at the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences, and he's also the trauma medical director for Arkansas Children's Hospital, and then I think he gets volunteered for a lot of things. He's the medical director of the Arkansas Burn Unit at Arkansas Children's, and now he is the system medical director for Arkansas Children's, and he's happy about that. Can you not see? Anyway, since we put the new Children's Hospital in Northwest Arkansas, so he's basically over both of those facilities. Anyway, he's going to share his personal trauma experience with us. He got to be a patient through the trauma system, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Todd Maxson.
I've told people before when I've given this talk, you just clap for me for being a bad motorcycle rider. That's my family, my daughter's graduation. I really do appreciate you letting me come and share this with you. We'll talk about this as a panel in just a little bit with Dr. Bledsoe, Greg, and Diana. But just a quick background. In 2008, we took care of just about the same number of patients that were injured as we do today. We have about 2,400 trauma deaths every year in the state of Arkansas, and that number has gone down, I think, thanks to the work that's been done by these folks at the Department of Health and what you do every day. But the problem is that our mortality rate back then was really the highest in the country. We had three things that happened to us. The American Medical Association came in, the American College of Surgeons, the American College of Emergency Physicians, and the CDC all came in and looked at our preparedness for injury, our ability to move a patient from one place to another, our hospital infrastructure, our communication infrastructure, and gave us actually the worst rating in the country. And that's disappointing because typically we'd always relied on Mississippi to stay off the very bottom in things. I was in Mississippi a couple weeks ago. I was giving a talk like this, and I had to change it to Louisiana. But we had, and I think this was an incredible wake-up call to everybody. There really had to be something that was done, and then sort of a couple other shoes dropped. Memphis, the wonderful trauma center in Memphis, announced that it was having financial difficulties. It was going to have to really divert patients from Arkansas and not be able to take care of them. So those several things that happened all in a row brought a big coalition of people together who worked across party lines and across ideology and said we must do something. So the first vote that happened was a vote to say we owe it to the people that we take care of every day to do a better job. We vote with our life. We vote with our families' lives. We vote with our friends' lives. We vote with our patients' lives. And so that vote took place. The legislation was passed. Money was given. The Department of Health created the system. And over the next 5 or 6 years, we saw the improvements. We saw a 50% reduction in trauma-related mortality. That is a phenomenal statistic. That's something that has never happened in the United States anywhere in that period of time. So I would say that vote with your lives had an incredibly positive effect. And if you and I take care of patients every day, and so we feel it because we have to look them in the eye. We have to look their families in the eye. I have to take moms and dads in a little room and tell them how the kids are doing after an injury. So it's very personal to us on a clinical level. That reduction in mortality ended up turning into about a 5-fold reduction in the cost of caring for those people. So it had a positive return on investment. So no matter how you looked at it, if you looked at it from our clinical standpoint, it was good. If you looked at it from a financial standpoint, it was good. But I got to look at it from a little bit different perspective. So these are the numbers. Again, back if you look at preventable mortality, those mortalities that if care had been delivered optimally from the moment that you pick them up on the street, transport them to the first hospital, stabilize them, transport them again to a tertiary hospital. If everything would have been done right, our mortality in 2009 was 30%. And that number came down over that 5-year period to about 16%. Now there's a long way to go there, but still, that's a tremendous improvement, really due to what you get up and do every day. I talked about the money there. So let me tell you about, let me give you the perspective that's a little bit different than that of the provider, or that of the legislator, or that of the finance officer. 53-year-old guy is working late at night. It's about 11:30, and cases had run long. I'd been on call. I was still on call. Multiple cases came in, and so we were just operating. And it was about 11:30, and we finally got a break, and we were going to have a few hours until we were ready to do the next case. And my wife and kids had gone out of town, and the last thing. Well, let me back up and tell you something. So in my family, there is a rank order of importance. There is the kids, the cats, and then me. And according to my wife, this is my wife's ranking list. And she loves me. I'm not concerned about that. But the cats are more important. So she said, we're out of town. No matter what you do, go home and feed my cats. So instead of laying down on my couch there at the hospital in my office and just waiting for the next case, I thought, well, hell, I'll go feed the damn cat. So I got on a motorcycle. I put my Kevlar jacket on. I put my showy helmet on. I don't know why anybody would ever ride a motorcycle without a helmet on. I don't get that. But I put all that on, and I took off. And I'm about 2 miles from the hospital, about halfway between Children's and the University Hospital. And a guy comes over the, let's see, I've got on the wrong side there. There you go. Guy comes over the overpass. I'm getting ready to get on the highway. Comes over the overpass, going about 50 miles an hour in my lane. And I swerve one way to try to get away from him, and he comes back toward that light on the front of the motorcycle and strikes me at about 50 miles an hour, about 45 degrees. I go off of the motorcycle, hit his car, hit the ground. He goes on for about 200-300 feet, dragging the motorcycle down under the car, and his car stops. He's unable to get out of the car and render any help. And I'm at a place that is absolutely dark. It is pitch black dark, and I'm laying in the middle of the road. And I tried to roll over, and I felt my searing pain in my pelvis. I felt my leg flop, broken. I felt my arms flop, broken, and having trouble breathing. So I get my helmet off, and I'm really just thinking, Todd, you're actually in a little trouble here. This is not good, and not good because I think A, you're really hurt, and B, you're going to get run over again because there's nobody there. Fortunately, I don't angels or whatever it is, but 2 guys walked up, and I don't know where they came from and what they're out doing at midnight now. But 2 guys walked up, and I said, "Do you have cell phones?" And they said, "Yes, we have cell phones." And I said, I need you to call 911, and I need you to call the Children's Hospital and call my resident that I'm on with tonight, because I need to tell her that I'm probably not coming right back. So they do all this for me. Very, very wonderful. They call 911, and between that and the time the MIM showed up, they paged my resident. We actually keep a junior resident and then a fellow in-house, a very senior resident. And we got the junior resident, and I said, "Hey, this is Todd Maxson. I need you to do something for me." She says, "Who is this?" And I said, "I need you to just be quiet. Just be quiet. Do this. Call Dr. Smith, my partner. Tell him I've been in a crash, that I'm going to the hospital, and I need him to come in to cover the trauma call tonight. And then call the university hospital and tell them I'm coming." So they did. She did all that. She got a hold of everybody. She did all that. EMS shows up a few minutes later, and you probably get this all the time, but it was the most unbelievably welcome sight ever to see those men and women get out of that truck. A fire truck was there early, and then the ambulance was there afterwards. And I knew at that point it's going to be okay. It was going to be okay. Wonderful, wonderful folks. Guy comes up to me, and I've got my helmet off, and he sort of looks around everything. I tell him, I think my arm's broken, I think my leg's broken, I think my pelvis is broken, and pulse is a little bit thready. I had the most tremendous sense of thirst that I think I've ever had, ever. It was unbelievable how thirsty I was, just laying on the road 5 minutes after being hit, just a compensatory response to shock, I guess. And he says, okay, so he gets my stuff off. He says, I need to get your vitals. So he gets my vitals. Those are my vitals. Heart rate's 101, so not too bad, huh? I take a beta blocker. Yeah, and he got that piece of information. So just did a fabulous job. I had an open book pelvic fracture. I'll jump ahead a little bit. I had an open book pelvic fracture. I tore all my rectus muscles off of my pelvis, and I was really having trouble breathing. So he says to me, we need to put a collar on. So I voted again. I said, no, you can't put a collar on. He says, well, we have to put. I said, no, you don't have to put a collar on. He goes, wait a minute, I know who you are. And I said, yes, and we're not going to put a collar on. And I said, I'm not trying to be rude, but if you put a collar on somebody, what's your success rate of intubation? It goes down. It's about half. And I really felt like I was probably going to need to be intubated. And so in our positions, what you do is you're laying there on the ground and you're thinking, if I have to be intubated, it goes in my esophagus, I have an anoxic brain injury, I'm ended up with a trach, I have a G-tube, my wife takes the cats and goes and marries somebody else. I mean, all of those things are going through my head, laying on the ground. So I said, please, I really think my neck's okay, I'm not distracted, I'm not intoxicated, I'd like for you not to. So, vote with your life. So the spinal motion restriction guidelines that are out today make sense. I think we will see less airway failures if we use it appropriately, and I think when it's needed, but people that are awake and alert and can participate in an exam probably don't have to be immobilized the way they did in the past. I'm very proud of my trauma band. I framed it. It's in a shadow box. And I earned it, damn it. I got to the university about three minutes later, and I did, all right, I'm going to tell you, that's not nice to do to y'all, but y'all say, so I'm standing in the trauma bay, and not uncommon. EMS, and it's usually flight. I'm going to pick on flight, folks. It's usually flight comes in, and they put the guy on the table, and they're just dead as a doornail. And I said, well, the guy's dead. And they said, I swear he had a pulse right there. And so we joke about you. I'm just going to tell you. We joke about you that the bump coming into the ED is what kills everybody. So the guy is getting me out of the truck. And they were so wonderful. They were so kind. And he says, I had a little bit of discomfort at the time. And he says, there's a bump here. And I heard a little bit. I said, oh shit. I said, that's the one that kills everybody. He did not think it was as funny as you did. I don't think he saw the humor in that. He did not see the humor in that. Trauma team was assembled. Emergency medicine folks. The trauma surgeon was there. And again, sort of my next vote with my life. The trauma surgeon who was on call has been out of her residency, our residency, for 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And I'm going to tell you, she walked in, and I was perfectly confident that things were going to be okay. I know how she was trained. I know the value of our training program here in Arkansas. It's a gift. It's an incredible gift to the state. That young woman, I had total confidence that things were going to be okay because I knew how she'd been trained. And I'm grateful for that opportunity to participate in that training. It's really a gift to me. She's also a friend, and she came up to me sort of a little bit shaky, and she says, Dr. Maxson, do you want me to call Amy, my wife, the cat lover? And I said, no, Anna. I said, don't call her. I said, because I might have to go to the OR. We're going to go to the OR pretty quickly here, I think. And let's call her afterwards. Let's call her after everything's okay. And she said, this is exactly what she did. She goes, okay. And she starts walking off, and she stops, and she turns back around, and she says, Dr. Maxson, I can't do that. And so she went and called my wife, and my wife said, have you called Ron Robertson, who's the chief of trauma there at the university, and been my best friend for 30 years. And she said, no, and my wife said, well, if you don't call her, I will. And Anna called, and Ron came in, and on the way in, Ron said, that's my best friend, I can't take care of him, and he called one of his other partners. So at some point, you know you're in trouble when there's 3 trauma surgeons in your trauma base. So there they are. That's Anna Pravatsky on the right. J.R. Thomas is our newest trauma surgeon, and then back in the back by the monitor is Terry Collins. So I knew things were not good. That was my blood pressure. 74/30. Vote number 3. Do not give fluids to trauma patients who have a palpable radial pulse and are mentating. Do not do it. The nurse came to hang the fluids, and I said, no, not one drop. Not one drop of fluid. She said, your pressure's 70. I said, I'm talking to you. I don't care. I don't care. What do you do when you give crystalloid, cold crystalloid, to somebody who's bleeding? You pop a clot off, you increase the bleeding, you increase coagulopathy, you make things worse. You increase acidosis, you make things worse. Don't give crystalloid to people who are awake and mentating. They're perfusing their end organs. You could argue that with me, that my being able to talk means that my end organ is perfused. But in general, I'm not going to have coronary ischemia. I'm not going to have kidney ischemia. I'm not having cerebral ischemia. I'm talking to you. So I don't need a drop of fluid at that point. If my palpable pulse goes away, if my mentation changes, I need a little something just to get me back to that level. But the old ATLS, where you put 2 large bore IVs in me and put 2 liters of fluid, would have killed me. I would have died that night if that would have happened. Not a drop of fluid. I voted with my life, not a drop of fluid. Here's my femur. My arm looked the same, about 10 pieces. There's my pelvis. The injuries, there are obvious rami fractures, a diastasis of the symphysis. My coccyx and sacrum are broken off. I have an SI joint disruption on the right, and L4 and L5 vertebrae are broken. Sorry. I'm bleeding. There's a huge pelvic hematoma at that point. So they finished the primary survey. They've put in IVs. They put a central line in to start resuscitation. I'm breathing okay, not great, but okay, but I don't have a pneumothorax. I've got an unstable pelvis. They put a binder on, close down my pelvic volume to try to help with bleeding, and call anesthesia and call angio, and we're going to go to angio. Then begin my secondary survey. After the CTs, I became hypotensive at that point, and my mentation and my pulse did diminish a little bit. I got 500 cc's of crystalloid, and it picked up. I got hypotensive again while we're getting ready to go to the operating room. And so they said, I heard them talking, you know, should we give one more bolus? And I said, are we not going to the operating room? Yes. Am I hypotensive from bleeding? Yes. Then what I'm bleeding is blood. And what I need back is blood. And I don't need red cells. I'm carrying enough oxygen at a hemoglobin of probably 6 or 7. I'm carrying enough oxygen. What I need is a colloid that will stay in my intravascular system, decrease inflammation, and correct the coagulopathy that's occurring because I'm bleeding to death. So, plasma first. Plasma first. So FFP was hung. Never frozen plasma is now available in our level 1 trauma centers, both the University and Children's Hospital, and that's our leading fluid that we're giving. The University of Texas in Houston just published a paper in JAMA that showed that helicopter services that apply plasma first, as opposed to red cells or crystalloid, have a decrease in mortality from bleeding trauma patients by 25%. Leading with plasma is the right way to do this. So vote number 5 with my life. Start with the plasma. Our head of the blood bank, I got this beautiful bouquet of flowers in my room a few days later, and it was from the head of our blood bank, and she said, I saw the MTP, the massive transfusion protocol, get paged out. I then heard somebody called me personally and said it was you, and she said, I bet he said, give the plasma first. And that's exactly what I told him in the trauma bay. Now, I don't want you to misinterpret anything else. I didn't mean to tell them squat in the trauma bay. They were doing all the right things, but I'm a trauma surgeon, you know, so I can't keep my mouth shut. They give the FFP and they go to IR. Those are the blood vessels that exist in the pelvis, and when you open that up, they're intimately attached to the back of the ilium, and they tear and bleed. So we started the FFP. We went to interventional radiology. That's Anna on the right. That's the one of the interventional radiologists on the left. We were in interventional radiology in 20 minutes after the time I hit the door. Here's another vote. Here's another vote. At our level 1 trauma centers, the time to definitive intervention, operating room, angiography to stop bleeding, definitive intervention averages about 15 minutes. At our centers that do not have dedicated trauma teams in the hospital, that number is 1 hour and 10 minutes. I would have died in 1 hour and 10 minutes. And I would have been in a great hospital with great emergency medicine physicians, and I'd have died. Because you can't stop this bleeding. This bleeding must be stopped with a coil or a clamp on a vessel. And we must have places in our state that can take a patient like me and get definitive intervention in faster than 1 hour and 10 minutes. We've got to vote again. We're going to get a chance to vote again as we look at our rules and regulations. And we've got to say that, like the rest of the country, that both our level 1 and our level 2 trauma centers ought to have that resource available, and it ought to be available to citizens of the state. That was the bleeding vessel on one side of my pelvis. There's another second bleeding vessel. The angiographers took those out, got all the bleeding stopped, and I stabilized. Those are the injuries. I think I pointed that out. They did a fast exam, an ultrasound exam, and there was no, they couldn't tell because there was no bladder. My bladder had ruptured and torn with the tear in my symphysis. I went back to the ICU and they stabilized me. I spent about 4 hours in the ICU and they gave me a lot of plasma. Then they finally gave some platelets. Then they finally gave some red cells, and that's the right way to resuscitate. So they gave me back the blood that I had lost in its constituent parts. Started a little bit of pressors. After my intravascular volume was up, started a little bit of pressure just to keep my perfusion pressure up a little bit. And then decided a few hours later that it was time to go to the operating room to try to stabilize my femur that was really in a million pieces. And the reason to do that is because your pulmonary complications go down by about 50% if you get your definitive stabilization done of your femur fracture within 18 hours of injury. So again, one of those things that's totally different at places that have people that are dedicated to trauma and critical care versus places that have an elective practice and it's an inconvenience for somebody to come in and do a case like this. So this orthopedic traumatologist took me to the operating room. 4 hours afterwards, stabilized my femur. During that operation, I became hypotensive, and they had to abort it. They had to really do a damage control procedure. They put the rod in, they put some nails in, they left the operating room on pressors, went back to the ICU, and resuscitated a little bit more. 18 hours later, that same orthopedic surgeon went back to the operating room and spent the next 13 hours reconstructing my pelvis. And that was combined with the urologist doing the repair of the bladder. And but that's what he did. So now, this guy's now up to about 15, 16 hours of operating on me. Go back to the ICU, resuscitate, extubate, go back to the operating room the next day for about 4 more hours to stabilize my right arm. Did I mention I'm a surgeon? Right. Pretty right-hand dominant. So about 4 more hours in the operating room making sure that was really just right. So now he's over 20 hours operating on me in 3 days. Back to the operating room the next day. That's my left knee. The lateral collateral ligaments had all been torn. The ACL was torn and it was unstable, so they stabilized that. So just a quick rundown. In a 3.5-day period, an urgent angiography in 24 hours, ICU resuscitation, femur fixation, ICU resuscitation, pelvic fixation, bladder repair, both bone forearm, left knee. All of this in less than 72 hours. That's what's necessary to get somebody who's 50 years, mid-50s, a little overweight, not great shape, out of an ICU alive without pulmonary complications, is to go every day and do these definitive operations. We've got to have places in our state that can do that kind of work. 20 hours of operating. So had I not been at that place, I'm positive. I don't wonder about it. I'm absolutely positive that this story would have ended totally differently. But it didn't, and it got me through. This slide's kind of a funny story, I'll tell you. Perspective from the other side. ICU psychosis is a real thing. They operated on me for 20 hours of anesthetic in a 3-day period. No sleep. I'd been on call before that, so I actually hadn't slept for about a day before that. So I'm now about day 5 with no sleep. And I closed my eyes that fourth night in the ICU, and I either get the care that was provided and get to do that and get to contribute that back, or things go very, very differently that night. I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you how grateful I am to you and everybody else that did so much to support me and help me through that. There were really some dark days, and if you don't think that sort of acute stress and PTSD is a real thing, it absolutely is. I had a psychologist in my house about a week after I got home, and he came twice a week, every week for about 3.5 months until we were sure that things were going to be okay at that point. That's a real component of this that needs to be addressed. Friends from around the country, and then my greatest sense of support and love, even though I'm second to the cats, is my wife. My best friend in the world, Ron Roberts at Overton University. I got to attend the wedding of our trauma registrar with my whole trauma team, my family. There's my kids. I got to go diving, so it looked a little like a walrus getting in and out of the. You see, when the walrus jumps up on the pier, so they would sit my fat ass down on the end of the boat, put my tank on, and then once in the water, great, everything's good in the water, and then it looked walrus-like getting out of the but got to do it. I flew my plane down here this morning to get to talk to you, and my kids are playing tennis in Memphis, and I'm going to get back in a plane in a little bit. You got to do something. I mean, they took my motorcycle from me. You got to do something. And with that right arm that got reconstructed, I can still do a decent job casting a fly rod. And then on a professional side, that's a 1 kilo baby that has an intestinal problem that needed emergency surgery. And I'm not being arrogant, but there are 5 people in the state of Arkansas that do that work, and we're busy, and so I got to come back and do that work. The little girl on the right is one of my patients with cancer that I've operated on several times, and I got to operate on her again, probably hopefully her last operation after coming back from this injury. And then again, as I said before, the greatest return on investment is I get to be their husband and dad. So for me personally, that return on the investment given by the legislature, by the governor, by the Department of Health, by the Arkansas EMS and Ambulance Association, the Hospital Association, that gift given in putting together the trauma system means everything to me. It means everything to me. And I've voted with my life on multiple occasions to continue to improve it. I'll continue to vote that way. I'll continue to advocate and vote as if it is me again, or my family, or my friends, or your family. So I don't think we're at the end. Our preventable mortality still stands at about 15 or 16%. Now, I'm very proud of that, but most mature systems have a preventable mortality rate that's about 5 or 6%. So there's still opportunity. We picked a lot of the low-hanging fruit. We did some things that really had to be done, and now I think some of the next changes are going to be tough, but they're necessary to get us where the rest of the country is. We've got to be sure that our funding is stable. There's just no way that this has been proven all over the country. When the state infrastructure of the Department of Health, when the ambulance associations, when the hospitals are not supported, the system declines. And so we've got to be sure that that continues to happen. And we've got to help the hospitals be sure that they continue to be financially viable in this endeavor so that they can invest in people. We can meet national standards. I get the pleasure of going all over the country and looking at different trauma centers and trauma systems. And Arkansas system, right this second, is actually quite enviable among the rest of this country. So I bristle when anybody says, well, you know, we've got a lot of rural, we've got a lot of poor, there is nothing about the state of Arkansas and about the men and women that take care of trauma that is anything less than anybody else, the best in the country. I bristle when somebody says we can't meet national standards. So if somewhere else they've proven that changing a process or a practice or a standard leads to a better outcome, we are able to adopt it, and we should adopt that. So you'll get a chance again at some point to vote, and I hope you vote because you're thinking about the patient that you picked up last night or you'll pick up tomorrow. I hope you vote as if it's you or one of your family members that's going to need this system. I really do appreciate getting to share with you a perspective from the other side, and I hope I continue to have the honor to take care of patients, and I want to thank you for what you do every day. Thank you very much.